Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, a high-stakes summit in Anchorage, Alaska. President Trump sitting down with Russian President Vladimir Putin happening now. What's at stake and what's expected? Mario Otsu at the White House. And amid those talks, one key detail may indicate whether peace can be made and the future of the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. Jack Bradley reports. Despite the meeting in Alaska, Russia and Ukraine both report that attacks continue today. Arian Pazdar has more on what people in the war-torn countries are saying. And back home, the standoff in Texas continues as Democrats are still absent. After Texas lawmakers ended their first special session, the governor immediately called another one, saying their work isn't done. Arlene Richards brings us the latest. Meanwhile, in the nation's capital, protections for illegal immigrants have been revoked. Jason Blair has the latest on day 4 of the federal takeover of the D.C. police.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump's high-stakes Alaska summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin happening now. And joining us now live is NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Otsu. Good evening, Mario. What is the latest from the Alaska summit and what can we expect from the president's meeting today?
Good evening to you too, Tiff. President Trump has voiced many expectations about this high-stakes summit, and there is still a lot of uncertainty as the meeting is underway. President Trump and President Putin today arrived almost simultaneously in Anchorage, Alaska, deplaned just after 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Alaska time. The two then shook hands twice and proceeded to pose for pictures on the red carpet that was rolled out on the tarmac before getting into President Trump's presidential limousine and heading to the meeting. The meeting is still currently underway. President Trump is joined there by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. President Putin, respectively, is joined by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Assistant for Foreign Affairs, Yuri Ushakov. Schedule-wise, after this meeting, a bilateral working lunch is expected and then a press conference later. President Trump said yesterday that if things go well with Putin in this meeting, the presser is expected to be a joint one with both President Putin and President Trump present. However, if things don't go well, President Trump said yesterday he will hold a press conference alone. On Air Force One this morning, President Trump said that nothing is set in stone, but he will not be happy if no ceasefire is reached. He also reiterated what he said earlier this week about consequences for Russia if they do not end the war in Ukraine. Here's what he said earlier. Take a listen.
Economically severe. Yes, it will be very severe. I'm not doing this for my health, okay? I don't need it. I'd like to focus on our country, but I'm doing this to save a lot of lives. Yeah, very severe. And China's not doing well economically, but we're all, look, I want everybody to do well. The war's got to stop and the killing's got to stop.
President Trump also said earlier in the week that the primary purpose of this first meeting is to feel things out with President Putin in person. And yesterday, the president said he characterized this meeting like the first move in a chess game, with the aim really to be to secure a second summit, this one a trilateral meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine. President Trump yesterday even floated 3 different potential locations for this potential second summit. One option, if things go well, the president said, was staying in Alaska and having President Zelensky join him and President Putin there. Tiff?
And Mari, has President Trump shared any details about potential negotiations?
President Trump repeated both yesterday and today that the summit's primary focus is peace, and so war negotiations need to be settled before any business or trade talk happens. Some reports have suggested that President Trump could offer Putin rare minerals for peace. But the president says, again, the main goal for the summit is to save lives, not to negotiate trade. In terms of specifics on negotiating the ceasefire, here's the president today responding to a reporter asking about territorial swaps. Take a look.
But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. I'm here to get him at a table. And I think you have two sides. Look, Vladimir Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine. If I wasn't president, he would right now be taking all of Ukraine. but he's not going to do it.
President Zelensky has rejected ceding any land to Russia. And former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said that she would nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he ends up successfully ending the Russia-Ukraine war without Ukraine ceding any territory to Russia. Back to you, Tiff.
All right, Mari, thanks for that update. Despite the high-stakes summit in Alaska today, Russia and Ukraine both report that attacks continue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky continues calling for his country's involvement in the peace process. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastar has more.
Footage out of Russia's Kursk region shows destruction after a reported Ukrainian attack on Friday. Russian officials say at least one civilian is dead and 12 more injured after the strikes. Meanwhile, Kiev also reports more attacks from Moscow. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia has been striking targets all week long, despite Friday's meeting.
They even kill people on the day of the negotiations, and that says a lot. We count on a strong position from the U.S. during the talks.
Zelensky also continues calling for a trilateral summit, writing, "A meeting of leaders is needed, at the very least Ukraine, America and the Russian side." He added that Ukraine would continue coordinating with its European partners on Saturday. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, amid the Russian strikes, a soldier says Moscow won't stop attacking in the long term, even if Russia agrees to a ceasefire.
A year or two will go by. They will rearm, and then they will push forward again. Never before have they kept their word.
And in Kiev, Ukrainians are gathering outside the U.S. embassy with messages for President Trump.
Land swap is not what is important now, but prisoners swap. Return all prisoners of war who are in Russian prisons.
Russians in Moscow, meanwhile, say they're happy that Trump and Putin are getting together for negotiations.
The most important thing in this dialogue, because there have been no meetings between Russia and the U.S. for a very long time.
Another Russian citizen says he hopes the leaders find common ground so the fighting can end and sanctions on Russia can be lifted. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
And ahead of the summit in Alaska between Putin and Trump, Russia's foreign minister arrived in Anchorage wearing a pro-Soviet Union sweatshirt. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more on this and what Putin's previous meetings with U.S. presidents can tell us about the talks.
Leading up to the summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump, the Russian foreign minister flew into Anchorage and he was wearing a pro-Soviet Union sweatshirt. His sweatshirt apparently reads CCCP, which is the USSR in Cyrillic script, the official alphabet of Russia. Russia was referred to as the USSR, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, during the Cold War.
We never plan ahead. We know that we have arguments, a clear, understandable position.
Now, the Russian foreign minister's choice of sweater is significant because it comes amid the high-stakes talks between Trump and Putin that could determine the fate of the war in Ukraine. And Ukraine was formerly Soviet Ukraine, but has since been an independent democratic country since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The base that Trump and Putin are meeting at is a Cold War-era Air Force base. And on his way to the summit, Putin visited a memorial honoring Soviet and American pilots in Russia. And after his meeting with Trump, Putin's set to lay wreaths on the graves of Soviet pilots buried in Alaska. Those pilots trained with Americans in Alaska during World War II. And whether he was prime minister or president, Putin has met with every U.S. president since Bill Clinton. But back in 2002, President George W. Bush met with Putin in Moscow, where they signed a treaty to reduce the number of nuclear warheads for both countries. But relations strained between the U.S. and Russia after the U.S. went to war in Iraq in 2003, which Moscow was against, and when Russia invaded its neighboring country of Georgia in 2008. Barack Obama was the last U.S. president to travel to Russia Russia in 2013, and talks have been less frequent over the years after Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. In June 2021, President Biden met with Putin in Geneva. They discussed Russian cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure and Russia's increasing aggression to Ukraine. Both leaders called the talks positive coming out of it, but less than a year later, in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, starting a war that's been going on ever since. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
In the Middle East, the Lebanese government has said it plans to disarm the Hezbollah terrorist group by the end of the year. Now, Hezbollah is threatening civil war if the government tries to disarm them. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
The Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group has exerted much control over southern Lebanon for years. And after the October 7th massacre, Hezbollah terrorists launched almost daily attacks from Lebanon against Israel until a ceasefire was reached. However, during the fighting, the Lebanese government did not appear to have any control over Hezbollah terrorists operating in southern Lebanon. But the Lebanese government recently adopted a series of goals presented by the United States to disarm Hezbollah by the end of the year. However, on Friday, the leader of Hezbollah said that Israeli forces must first leave Lebanon before the group will cooperate with Lebanon on national security. Otherwise, he said if anyone tries to disarm the group, there could be a civil war between Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. Israeli forces are currently stationed in what it calls security zones in southern Lebanon to help protect the state of Israel. On Friday, Israel reported striking military infrastructure in southern Lebanon belonging to the Hezbollah terrorist group. Israel said the site and the military activity within it was a violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon. Meanwhile, in Israel, residents attended the second annual Nova Healing Concert, which honors the victims of the Nova Music Festival who were killed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. One of the attendees said his son was killed at that tragic music festival.
He was hiding below the small, the mushroom stage with his three friends, and all of them stayed there.
Another attendee said her dad was managing medical operations at the music festival on October 7th.
And he wasn't supposed to be there, but he decided to stay. And then on the attack, he treated many people and saved many lives, until Hamas terrorists murdered him.
The organizer of the Nova Healing Concert shared his thoughts as well.
The dance floor is supposed to be the most safest place on earth. And through the dance floor, through dancing, through the music, we are healing together.
Another woman who survived the attack on the music festival attended the event as well.
It is healing, as you would call it, but most importantly, it makes me feel hopeful that we will dance again.
Hamas terrorists killed approximately 400 people who attended the Nova Music Festival in 2023. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott announced a second special session today after the legislature failed to approve a new map. Democratic lawmakers are preparing to return home to strengthen their legal claims against the map. NTD's Arlene Richards has the latest.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott announced a second special session on Friday morning amid the ongoing redistricting fight.
Those runaway Democrats are required to act on that agenda. They're failing to do their duty.
Texas Democratic state lawmakers fled the state 2 weeks ago to break quorum and prevent a vote on a new redistricting map. The map could give the GOP 5 additional seats in the 2026 midterms. For the second session, the agenda remains the same: bills to address the recent flooding and new congressional maps. Speaker Dustin Burrows gavelled into the second special session about 2 hours after the first one wrapped up.
We are about to receive a motion to sine die. Do not go very far, as I believe our governor will be calling us back for another special session very, very soon.
Burrows announced that the chamber yet again did not meet quorum, thanks to Democrats remaining out of state to protest the redraw. He said he'd call the sessions back-to-back until Democrats return and allow the vote. They are facing fees of up to $500 each day they are absent, and the governor said they would be arrested once they return to Texas. Attorneys told the Texas Democrats to return to strengthen their legal case against the new map, but Democrats had some conditions. They wanted Texas Republicans to end the first legislative special session and the vote on the proposed map. And they wanted California Democrats to release their own redistricting map to offset the 5 U.S. House seats Republicans hope to gain in Texas. California Governor Gavin Newsom on Thursday teamed up in Los Angeles with congressional Democrats and legislative leaders to, quote, meet fire with fire.
We're putting the maps on the ballot, and we're giving the power to the people.
It's unclear when Texas Democrats will return home to face the second session and the new map. State House Democratic leader Gene Wu said they were prepared to, quote, take this fight to the courts. Now Democrats are relying on the courts and other blue states to try to offset Republican gains. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Washington, D.C.'s policies protecting illegal immigrants have been revoked by U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. This while the D.C. Attorney General files a lawsuit against the Trump administration. The suit contends that the federalization of the city's police force is illegal. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
D.C. will not remain a sanctuary city actively shielding criminal aliens.
Pam Bondi says no more illegal immigration protections in Washington, D.C. In an order titled Restoring Safety and Security to the District of Columbia, Bondi mainly targets the city's sanctuary city policies, revoking orders that restrict the city's police on how they can handle situations with illegal immigrants. She tells Fox News that Washington, D.C. residents have been thanking law enforcement officers.
An elderly woman walks up to law enforcement and thanks them so she can go to the market again.
In Thursday night's order, Pam Bondi also took power away from Washington's police chief Pamela Smith. She named DEA Administrator Terry Cole as Emergency Policy Commissioner. According to the memo, DC's police leaders need Cole's permission before administering any directives. On Friday, in response to the federalization of Washington, D.C.'s police, the District of Columbia Attorney General Brian Schwab filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Schwab calls it a, quote, illegal hostile takeover of our local police force.
They have sowed chaos and endangered the public safety and the residents and visitors to the District of Columbia.
FBI Director Kash Patel releases the latest statistics since the federal takeover of D.C.'s police. He says 120 arrests total have been made since the takeover started on Tuesday. 18 of those were made on Thursday night. Patel says one arrest was someone on warrant for murder and another was on warrant for rape. Also on Thursday, Patel reports that 8 firearms were seized and multiple drug seizures were made. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, many tariffs are in effect, but inflation is not as red hot as some economists expected. Kevin Hogan dives into the data to find out if President Trump's tariffs are showing up on the price tag and if price jumps are on the way. Valley fever is on the rise across California, and doctors say many may not even know they're sick. Christina Corona tells us the symptoms to look out for and which areas are seeing the biggest increase. And in college football, a major ruling in Michigan's sign-stealing scandal. Dave Martin has the report when we come back. And welcome back. You're looking at a live look into Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, where that high-stakes summit is happening between President Trump and Vladimir Putin of Russia. Of course, big on the agenda, is there going to be peace in Ukraine? Right now, you're looking at the press room. There's a lot of press gathering in there. Perhaps something will be happening quite soon. We will be tuning into that if something does happen. There is tentatively scheduled a joint presser if the summit goes well at 7:30. So perhaps it's gone very well, and we're going to see that very soon. So we'll bring you back into that feed live if it does develop. So that is a live look at Alaska right now. And on the tariff inflation conundrum, so many economists and experts said President Trump's tariffs would raise prices, but generally speaking, prices have not gone up in the categories of goods targeted by tariffs. What can explain this phenomenon, and will prices eventually rise? Our data reporter Kevin Hogan helps us make sense of this.
Here's your basket of goods. What's new? Tariffs on cars, clothing, appliances. What's not new? More inflation. The inflation rate stayed the same. The question, are tariffs causing inflation? The answer, no. Not yet. Here's why that's so strange and what that looks like graphically. The average tariff rate for all goods imported into this country, according to the Yale Budget Lab, was around 2 to 3% before President Trump's second term began. Then he starts imposing tariffs, and then Liberation Day, big push for reciprocal tariffs, causing that average to spike north of 28%. And then that rate stabilized, a couple trade deals were made, and now it's hovering at about 18% right here. So, given that, what many expected is that as the tariff rate goes up, then inflation would go up. But actually, it stayed basically level, and that's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. From June to July, it was level at about 2.7%. No change at all. That's the mystery. Economists are puzzled. That's the hard data. Outside of that, all that's left are some theories. Is it that inflation was supposed to drop off that pandemic peak more, and these tariffs are pushing it up to level? Or here's another theory, and it's based on what Barclays economists found. The theory is that the average tariff rate that importers paid was not this, but instead about 9%, and then follows that curve. So inflation stayed the same. So, but what if you take out food and energy prices because gas dropped significantly? That's called core inflation. So that actually ticked up a bit in July from June to just over 3% right here. That's going up. Now, economists usually look at this number to gauge actual inflation because food and energy prices are typically volatile, meaning they fluctuate a lot. So that's going up. But why? Let's isolate some tariff-targeted goods to see if they are the inflation culprits. So you see appliances, clothing, a lot of trade going on there, cars, new cars, toys, many of them come from China, bedding, laundry equipment. If tariffs were to cause inflation, you would most likely see it here. It could appear elsewhere, but to a lesser extent, but definitely here. So what do we see? Not much change for items in these categories. And actually, some deflation for clothes and for appliances year over year. So let's compare these rates to the headline inflation rate, which is about 2.7% right there. So some of these categories are above, but many are below, meaning they are not the items driving inflation for the most part. But the whole story is yet to be told because, for example, what may be happening broadly and is happening in some individual cases is that companies stocked up and say bought a bunch of cars before tariffs set in to dodge the duty. And now they're selling those lower cost cars, so that isn't showing up in the data. It's too early to tell. Now, what we are sure about is that right now, it's primarily the increase of the prices of services that's driving inflation, not traded goods. We'll keep tracking this. Back to you.
California is seeing a surge in valley fever cases this year. Health officials are warning residents to watch out for symptoms like cough, fever, and fatigue after being in dusty areas. NTD's Christina Corona has more details on the story.
California is on track for another record year of valley fever. It's a disease caused by inhaling fungal spores found in dry, dusty soil. The California Department of Public Health says more than 6,000 cases have been reported so far in 2025.
State health officials report over 6,700 cases of valley fever through July, which is well above the 10-year average of 3,833. That's higher than last year's mid-year total of 6,364 cases. In 2024, California saw nearly 12,500 cases, the most ever recorded. The illness is caused by inhaling fungal spores found in dry, dusty soil. It's most common in the San Joaquin Valley and southern parts of California, but case numbers are rising in the northern Central Valley and along the Central Coast. Wet winters help the fungus grow, while hot, dry, and windy weather spreads the spores. Construction, farming, and wildfires can raise exposure risks. Symptoms can include fever, cough, fatigue, headaches, rashes, and, in severe cases, pneumonia-like illness. Health officials say the illness often presents like the flu or COVID-19.
Health officials urge anyone with a lingering cough, fever, or fatigue after being in dusty areas to see a doctor. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
In the fall of 2023, the University of Michigan's football team was embroiled in what became known as the sign-stealing scandal. Today, the NCAA came down on the Wolverines with several major penalties. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
Michigan's football team was hit with multiple penalties today, including a 3-game suspension for current head coach Sharon Moore, plus several fines that could total more than $20 million by the NCAA's Committee on Infractions panel. But notably, they were spared from the most serious one, a postseason ban. Moore, who was an assistant at the time of the violations 2 years ago, was already set to serve a self-imposed 2-game suspension this season. The panel, though, added one more game to that total in their ruling today. The majority of the violations, though, stemmed from former assistant coach Connor Stallion's sign-stealing scheme. Although sign-stealing isn't against NCAA rules, in-person scouting of future opponents and the use of electronic devices to record their sidelines is. And the panel's ruling found 56 instances of off-campus in-person scouting of 13 future regular season opponents occurred across 52 contests from 2021 to 2023. In addition to those violations, Stallions and Moore, as well as fellow assistant coach Denard Robinson and then head coach Jim Harbaugh, failed to meet the committee's expectation of cooperation. While Moore was given a suspension, Harbaugh, Stallions, and Robinson were hit with a 10, 8, and 3-year show cause orders respectively, meaning any school that wishes to hire them during those periods would first have to show cause to the NCAA that they won't commit the same infractions, essentially banning them from college football. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
Coming up, what do we know so far about the Trump-Putin Summit? We bring in a panel of 3 foreign policy analysts to unpack it all after the break. Welcome back. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin just concluded a high-stakes meeting in Anchorage, Alaska after 2.5 hours. You're looking at a live look into Alaska right now where the press is gathering. There's a lot of people there, so we're expecting a perhaps joint presser if the summit went well. In just a few minutes, if it didn't go well, it should be just President Trump showing up. And of course, this does mark the first time the U.S. and Russian presidents have sat down together since the start of the Ukraine conflict in February of 2022. Now, President Trump told reporters earlier today that his goal is to get Putin back to the negotiating table, not to broker a deal on behalf of Ukraine. He also stopped short of promising security guarantees for Kyiv as part of a deal to end the war. And to unpack all of this, we have an excellent panel of guests joining us now. Retired U.S. Navy Captain Armin Kurdian. He's a foreign policy and national security analyst. Rebecca Grant. She's the vice president of the Lexington Institute. And foreign affairs analyst Gerard Filitti. He's an attorney specializing in international law. Thank you all so much for being here on this historic night. Now, first, what are your thoughts on how this summit went and how likely we are to see that next meeting with Zelensky at the table? Armin, you can kick it off.
Certainly. Well, obviously a lot of high hopes going into this. I'm remaining very, very skeptical. I think Putin is going to use Trump's desire to make a deal against him. However, of course, he's taking his economy to the absolute breaking point, which is not something that the Western economies are willing to do. So you see a lot of force of will and maximum effort on one side with less will, but maximum economic power on the other. Really, what's really hurting Russia right now is the sanctions. They're selling oil at a discount to India, to China, and other countries that will take it. Their oil quality is not quite as good as it is in the U.S. If we are able to completely put a complete stranglehold on their oil dollars, their petrodollars, that could spell the end of his economy, could spell the end of his rule, He's aware of that. He understands that, but he knows that he has at least some time to continue to try to consolidate his gains in Ukraine. I have a feeling he's going to maybe agree to a tentative ceasefire, but come up with some reason the next week or two to start the hostilities up again.
And Rebecca, your thoughts on how the summit is going so far?
Well, no question, all the economic deals and showmanship aside, President Trump wants Putin to agree to a path to a ceasefire, likely to get at least heading in that direction. But I'd say let's watch for two things. One, is Putin going to stop these terrible drone and missile strikes that he's escalated since May? And secondly, whatever comes out on that stage at the presser, the NATO allies must hang together as they have been doing, continue their support for Ukraine, and also continue to build up NATO towards that 5% goal, because Russia remains a very powerful military threat and a threat due to its alliance with China.
And Gerard, your thoughts on what's happening so far today?
I think the best thing that we can expect to see if this happens is some show of goodwill by Russia that diminishes the attacks that it's currently going, something short of a ceasefire, but some indication that it is actually willing to do something tangible to show that it's willing to sit down and negotiate. Now, this is to some extent unlikely. This is a very preliminary meeting, but it's an important one nonetheless. This is the first time Vladimir Putin has sat face-to-face with Donald Trump in this administration. This is a very important sounding out meeting to show the resolve of the United States to get peace, to get a ceasefire, to get a tangible deal done in Ukraine. And the people that Trump has brought to this meeting, not just foreign policy experts, but also economic advisors, show what he is going to do, what he's willing to do, to link this to trade, to link this to restoring Russian economic ties with Russia. So putting the carrot on the table. The question is also what stick there is, and we have seen that U.S. arms exports is the biggest stick there is.
And Rebecca, in terms of what we know so far today, what do you make of the addition of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick at the summit? These are two key economic cabinet members. Do you see their presence as a signal that negotiations will lean heavily on trade and economic issues?
Well, it's a double signal because they could craft incentives for Putin, but these are also the two that go around enforcing heavy-duty sanctions and tariffs, so they are Trump's key power players. I also liked the addition to the summit lineup of the F-22 fighters and the B-2 bombers flying over J-Bear. I thought that was a pretty powerful signal from America's team.
And speaking of optics here, Armin, what has body language told us so far on the dynamic between Trump and Putin so far today?
It shows us what we know about Donald Trump, that he's very transactional. He doesn't really have enemies per se. He wants to make his counterpart there very comfortable. He perhaps take him off guard, or at least show that, hey, he's not walking into an ambush. So there's a lot to be said there. Trump definitely wants a deal, but he's also got to remember that besides all this naked aggression and this battle and the over 1 million people killed, Russia has basically stolen tens of thousands of Ukrainian children, kidnapped them, and brought them into Russia. So, I mean, we have a lot more going on behind the scenes. He's got to remember the type of individual that he's dealing with. He may seem nice and he may seem accommodating and forthright and perhaps willing to work towards a potential ceasefire, but all at the same time, he's continuing his activities. And frankly, I think this is exactly what Putin wants. I think he's come here. He's going to maybe be a little conciliatory and try to seem that way. But I think in the end of the day, all they're doing is trying to buy time because they see themselves still inexorably making progress in Ukraine, and they want to continue to do that for as long as they possibly can.
And Gerard, when it comes to this summit, what's the significance of Alaska as the location? This is U.S. territory, turf. What message is that sending to Putin?
It's not just Alaska, but it's on a major military base, a joint base where we have strategic bombers were based during the Cold War, and where we routinely fly patrols to intercept Russian planes that overfly or try to overfly the United States. The significance here is, in some extent, a show of force. It's showing that this is the United States, that we take our military defense very seriously, and if you are our friend or our ally, this is the military that will defend them. This is sending the message to Vladimir Putin that we are by far a force to be reckoned with, and he cannot take for granted the fact that under the Biden administration, there was not American involvement in foreign conflicts, in this conflict specifically. But I think this also sends the message. I think part of this is the unwillingness of Putin to meet anywhere else. Let's not forget that the ICC, International Criminal Court, has a warrant out for his arrest. He is persona non grata in most of the world. The only place that he can have this meeting is in the United States, and better in D.C., out of the prying eyes or the interference of Congress or specifically Democrats than anywhere else that this meeting could be held.
Now, Zelensky has accused Putin of stalling for time, including with this summit. On that note, Rebecca, what objectives do the different players have in this?
Oh, so many objectives at stake. And of course, Putin has stalled and the Russians have agreed to things and then not fulfilled their promises. That's been going on all spring. For Zelensky, he must keep Ukraine as a sovereign country that is economically viable. And then comes that just heartbreaking question of territory. And of course, getting back the Ukrainian children that have been abducted and stolen away into Russia. Europe wants to be in the conversation and to make sure that the U.S. remains a strong partner opposing Russia in really what is now a generational threat. China, they like poking the eye of the U.S. and keeping Russia going in this game. Trump, of course, wants peace, better world order, and we don't know what Vladimir Putin wants. Hopefully they've been fighting out in that room today.
On that note, Armin, what leverage does President Trump have over both parties? Whom does Trump have more to gain from?
Well, his leverage over Zelensky is the fact that the U.S. is building a lot of these weapons that are being bought by the European Union and being sent to Ukraine. If he says, I'm not going to sell weapons to the European Union anymore, that's leverage over Zelensky. The leverage over Russia, I think, is much more serious with regards to advanced sanctions, perhaps even taking Russia off of the petrodollar, not letting them transact, oil transactions in dollars. The ruble is not necessarily worth very much. It's not necessarily a respected currency. So doing that could have very serious consequences for the Russian economy and perhaps bring it to collapse much more quickly. But Trump also has been advised by, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, the fact that we are building a lot of these weapons and selling to the EU, even though they are technically advanced and very, very capable. And the fact that the European Union is still paying for them, we are still having to use our own industrial capacity to actually build them. And that capacity is challenged. It's very hard to build Patriot missiles. It's very hard to build M1 tanks and all this advanced explosives and all these advanced propellants. It takes serious time. And our industrial base is pretty much tapped to the limit, trying to support us and for our additional requirements and for what we're seeing in the rest of the world. So that is perhaps some pressure on Trump to actually bring this war to an end because it is having an impact on our industrial base and our military.
And speaking of pressure, Gerard, what impact, if any, do Trump's threats and statements, like how the war would have never started under his watch, have on Putin?
I don't think they have much impact on Putin. I think Putin has done what Putin does without regard to what anyone else in the world thinks. That's the type of leader that Putin is. However, where we do see Trump being able to use his statements to the advantage of ending this conflict is the fact that he is not bound by the decorum that we've had, for lack of a better word, in other negotiations. He speaks bluntly. And because he speaks bluntly, he feels that he can criticize whoever needs criticism in order to get a deal done and prod people to the table. We saw that when President Zelensky paid a visit to the Oval Office. So Donald Trump's tough talk is something that is resonating well with people because it does cut through the BS, to use the polite word for TV, and bringing people to realize what the actual issues are. And here the issues are myriad, but ultimately it comes down to security guarantees for Ukraine and some method by which Russia will hold on to some of the land that it's taken.
And Rebecca, in terms of the summit today, how likely were conversations around nuclear arms to have come up today? No one wants to see a nuclear war, so how do you see that fitting in?
A lot of hints that the Russians might bring it up. And of course, the issue here is that the New START treaty has been extended. It expires in February of 2026. That's pretty much the last significant nuclear arms control piece we have with Russia. China doesn't even participate in those kind of things. So it's really left us all wondering, is there a chance to extend this, to renegotiate it? Will Putin just walk away and uparm his nuclear submarines, bring out more of his nuclear warheads rather than abiding by that 1550 limit. I don't know whether today this is a real chance to talk about it or just a distraction, but I suspect it has come up, whether it makes it into the presser later or not. I suspect it did come up in the discussions.
And we are seeing more activity inside that press room in Alaska right now. We'll be seeing if anyone is going to appear. Specifically, we're waiting to see if President Trump appears. But until someone does, Gerard, will the negotiations hinge on land, or is this a non-starter at this point?
I think the negotiations do hinge on land, but that is also the sticking point. For Ukraine, it has paid a very high price to hold on to the land that it has, and so many lives have been lost fighting over something that is that goes into the life and soul of a nation. So for Ukraine to give up land, for Russia to keep land, that is the most difficult part of this. And even then, I think that you would see potentially some movement if there are security guarantees that this would not happen again. We're 10 years past Crimea. This is not the first time that Russia has invaded Ukraine and taken land. There is no guarantee right now that if there's some deal is reached that is unenforceable or that does not have security guarantees, that this would not happen again next year, in 3 years or 5 years down the line. So ultimately, that is the tougher pill for Russia to swallow, because Russia does not want any sort of armaments within Ukraine. They want it disarmed. So this is what makes it very difficult. It's the land, but it's also the security agreement that would keep the peace. And without both of those components, I don't think you can reach a deal.
And Armin, zooming out a bit here, President Trump appears to be wanting to bring Russia closer to the U.S., pulling it away from China. How is China watching all of this?
Well, China has a vested interest in seeing this war continue for no other reason that it's continuing to drain the U.S. and the European Union of a lot of weapons. Same thing in the Middle East, the U.S. having to expend a lot of precision and highly advanced weapons, which otherwise would be used in a conflict there in the Indo-PACOM region. China also still, while they want to be the world's preeminent economic power and their economy may pass us in size within the next 5 to 10 years, still per capita, they are much further behind the U.S. than they would like to admit. So while they have geopolitical reasons for wanting to see this war continue, there's also perhaps other economic reasons they would like to have a partnership with the U.S. However, I don't know that you'll ever have a proper, fully functional relationship with that country, considering a lot of the theft of intellectual property that they've had. That's cost American businesses tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. In fact, a lot of the military technology comes from U.S. technology as well. So interesting dance is being played between the U.S., Russia, and China. But at the end of the day, Russia and China have a lot more in common than either one of those countries have with the U.S. because it's the two of them that really want to bring the U.S. down and keep us inhibited, vice necessarily the U.S. and Russia against China or the U.S. and China against Russia.
And Rebecca, given the No Limits partnership here, how do you see China watching all of this unfold?
Very carefully, and that No Limits partnership has really expanded since the last time Trump and Putin met. China and Russia did naval exercises in the Sea of Japan off Vladivostok just last week. They, a year ago, were flying 2 Chinese nuclear-capable bombers along with 2 Russian Tupolev nuclear-capable bombers right off the airspace of Alaska. That was last summer. You just everywhere, China has supported Russia's war machine with letting them import microelectronics, nitrocellulose for explosive precursors and propellants. I mean, they are just completely interlaced. And then add on top of it, China buying 47% of Russia's oil. It's hard to see how these two come apart, although it would be terrific because the China-Russia alliance is just an enormous danger and threat to the U.S. and, frankly, to the world.
And it does seem the press room is getting quite heated right now. Perhaps something is happening. So Armin Kurdian, Rebecca Grant, and Gerard Filitti, thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany.
And as President Trump is meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, are everyday Americans feeling confident about a potential peace deal coming down the pipeline? NTD Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
President Trump's about to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin tonight. Do you think we're one step towards the right direction?
Well, I'm hoping it's a step to the right direction. We need to end the war in Ukraine, and I'm hopeful President Trump can do that.
I definitely think so. I think he's the only man that can actually make things happen. In terms of solving things with Russia and Putin, there's nobody better than Donald Trump to be in charge.
I think it's kind of up to him to lean into it, maybe take a harsher stance, and then try to accomplish something that way. We don't have a lot of other options.
I'm on the fence. I don't trust Putin at all. Everything he's ever said's been a lie. But I do have a respect for our president. Hopefully he can do something.
I think Trump's just trying to find out what we can do. And I don't think they're going to be able to figure out a land deal today, but at least they'll be able to talk, get some dialogue. So I think it's a good thing.
People are saying part of the strategies from the Trump administration is to push Russia away from China by building that relationship. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it would be good if we could get Russia away from China, but I don't think that's going to work because China is really, they're on the same continent. They're, connected. And China, Iran, and Russia are all aligned together on the same page, really.
I don't think whatever we do affects Putin at all, with China anyway. I mean, Putin's going to do what he wants to do, and he's not being pushed away from China at all.
You don't want to have necessarily, okay, Putin goes away from us and then joins up with China. Then we've got a bigger situation over with Russia and Ukraine and all that. I would hope that it brings us closer and doesn't push us so far away, but in the end, I mean, we really need to make sure that our country is secure.
China isn't afraid to do business with people we don't like and vice versa. So I think China's just going to do what they're going to do. It's just we got to be careful with, espionage and that type of stuff.
And here's another live look into that press room in Anchorage, Alaska, right after President Trump and President Putin of Russia had an over 2.5-hour summit earlier today. You just see Secretary of State Rubio just there on stage on the kind of in the middle of the shot. He's right there. He was part of those meetings. So lots happening in that press room right now. Hopefully soon we'll see some of the, this imminent meeting happening. You did see some Russian officials too, actually. Lavrov was there, Sergei Lavrov. And we'll have even more coverage on the meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin and that imminent press conference coming up here on NTD. Tune in for analysis from geopolitical experts and the latest updates from Alaska on Capitol Report with Steve Lance, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.